Emma Walsh moved through the mess hall kitchen like she had done it 1,000 times before. Her hands worked fast, flipping eggs, filling trays and serving coffee, all without missing a beat. She didn't talk much, and when she did, her voice was calm and polite. Most of the soldiers who came through the food line barely noticed her. To them, she was just another cook, someone who made sure their meals were hot and ready before training began. Every morning started before sunrise. The air outside was still cold, and the smell of bacon and brewed coffee filled the kitchen before the first soldier even walked in. Emma liked it that way. She liked being busy, keeping her mind on simple things: stirring, cleaning, serving. There was comfort in the routine. The mess hall was always noisy once breakfast began. Boots thumped across the floor, trays clattered, and laughter echoed through the big metal room. Emma stayed in her small corner behind the counter, her cap pulled low and her sleeves rolled down tight. She didn't mind the noise, but she never joined in the jokes or small talk. When the younger cooks teased each other or sang along with the radio, she only smiled faintly and kept working. She wasn't unfriendly, just quiet. People around the base knew her as Walsh from the kitchen. Some said she used to be a teacher before joining the military. Others thought she just liked to cook. No one really knew the truth, and Emma never offered it. When someone once asked her why she joined the army at her age, 34, older than most new recruits, she had only shrugged and said, "Just wanted to help." That was all she ever said about it. But sometimes, when the rush was over and the kitchen grew quiet again, she would stand near the window, wiping her hands on a towel, and her eyes would drift to the parade ground outside. Soldiers ran drills, shouting commands, carrying gear. She watched them for a few seconds, her face unreadable, then turned back to her work. There was something about her, something hard to explain. She didn't act like the others who worked in the kitchen. Her movements were sharp, trained, like someone who had learned discipline a long time ago. When a pan fell once and nearly hit a new recruit, Emma caught it midair without even looking. "Careful," she said softly, placing it back on the counter. The young recruit had stared at her for a moment, surprised by her reflexes. Emma just gave a small smile and went back to the stove. People respected her. She never raised her voice, but everyone listened when she spoke. If a new cook didn't know how to handle the rush or burn something, she was the first to help without judgment. "It's fine," she'd say. "Start over. Everyone burns something sometimes." Outside the kitchen, though, she was invisible. She ate alone, often late after the others had gone. She read books no one paid attention to: survival manuals, old field stories, and history books. On Sundays, she wrote letters she never mailed. Her bunk was neat, her locker organized like a soldier's. She had no photos, no decorations, only a small notebook and a folded piece of cloth that she kept carefully hidden. When others asked what it was, she said it was just an old keepsake. Despite her quietness, Emma carried an air of confidence that people noticed but couldn't place. Some of the younger soldiers joked that she was too calm for a kitchen worker. "Maybe she used to run a restaurant," one said. "Or a prison," another laughed. Emma didn't respond. She had learned long ago that silence revealed less than words ever could. Still, there were moments when something about her seemed to shift. Small things like when she heard helicopters fly overhead, or when she saw soldiers in combat gear walk past. Her eyes would follow them for a second too long, her expression distant, like she was remembering something she wished she could forget. Then, as quickly as it came, the look would fade, and she'd return to her quiet routine. Her coworkers had grown used to her silence, her careful way of doing things, her habit of disappearing after work. She never went out with them, never drank at the base bar. "She's a bit of a ghost," one of them said once, and the name stuck. Ghost Walsh. But the truth was, Emma wasn't trying to hide from others. She was trying to hide from herself. She'd seen and done things that still echoed in her sleep. The mess hall was her refuge, her new world of order and peace. Every clean plate, every warm meal, it was her way of rebuilding something inside her that had long been broken. She told herself she was happy there, that this quiet, simple life was enough. She didn't need medals, missions, or recognition anymore. The war, whatever it had been for her, was over. Or at least she thought it was. Because one morning, when a new commanding officer walked into the mess hall and looked at her just a little too long, everything she had tried to bury began to surface again. All it took was a glance, and a small tattoo, half hidden beneath her sleeve, to bring back a past she had sworn to leave behind. The next morning began like any other at Fort Bragg. The sky was still dark, the air cold and damp with the smell of early morning dew. In the mess hall kitchen, lights flickered on one by one as Emma Walsh tied her apron and started the breakfast shift. She liked these quiet moments before the day came alive, when the base was still half asleep and the world outside felt peaceful. She moved easily through the kitchen, opening large metal trays, checking temperatures and setting up the serving line. The rhythm was familiar and comforting. "Morning, Walsh," called Corporal Jenkins, the young assistant cook, yawning as he stumbled in. "Morning," she replied with a small smile. "Coffee's fresh. You look like you need it." He grinned and poured himself a cup. "You're a lifesaver, ma'am." Emma just shook her head, amused. The same exchange happened every day. She found a strange comfort in these small, predictable things. The sleepy greetings, the clatter of pans, the faint music from the old radio sitting by the sink. By 6 a.m., the mess hall was alive. Soldiers lined up with trays, boots squeaking against the floor. The air filled with the smell of scrambled eggs, sausages, and toast. Laughter and chatter echoed through the big room as everyone grabbed breakfast before training. Emma stood behind the counter, serving with practiced precision. A spoon of eggs here, 2 slices of toast there, quick and steady. She didn't rush, but she didn't waste time either. Her face stayed calm, focused, and friendly. To most soldiers, she was just part of the background, one of the many unseen hands that kept the base running smoothly. A few regulars smiled or thanked her as they passed. "Morning, Cook Walsh," one said cheerfully. "Morning," she replied with a polite nod. As she worked, she noticed small things, the way new recruits always looked half awake, the way older officers always carried themselves with quiet authority. She didn't talk much, but she saw everything. She noticed when someone was nervous before a big inspection or when someone hadn't eaten properly for days. She cared in silence. Outside, a cold wind rattled the windows, but inside, the room was full of life. The laughter, the smell of food, the noise. All of it made her feel useful. This was her world now, and she liked it that way. Then, around 7:15, the atmosphere shifted slightly. The mess hall doors opened, and a small group of officers entered, led by a tall man in a crisp uniform. The noise in the room softened almost immediately. It was the new commanding officer, Colonel James Harlan, recently assigned to oversee training operations at Fort Bragg. He was known for his sharp discipline and calm authority. Emma had heard about him from Jenkins the day before. "He's strict but fair," Jenkins had said. "Old school type. Knows his stuff." Emma didn't think much of it at the time. Officers came and went. It didn't affect her work. So she continued serving, head down, focused on the next plate. Colonel Harlan moved through the line, quietly observing the soldiers. His posture was straight, his steps measured. When he reached Emma's station, he gave her a brief, polite nod. "Good morning," he said. His voice was deep and firm but not unkind. "Morning, sir," Emma replied, handing him a tray with scrambled eggs and bacon. As she passed the plate to him, her sleeve slipped slightly up her forearm. It was a small movement, something she didn't even notice. But Colonel Harlan did. His eyes froze for a split second. There, just above her wrist, partly hidden under the fabric, was a small tattoo. A black dagger with wings and a faint skull beneath it. The ink was faded but still sharp enough to recognize. He didn't say anything right away. He took the tray, thanked her, and moved on, but his expression had changed. He looked at her again, just a moment longer than necessary. Emma felt it, that brief pause, that stare. It wasn't the usual kind of look she got. This one carried recognition, curiosity, maybe even disbelief. But she didn't react. She simply nodded and continued serving the next soldier, pretending nothing had happened. Inside, though, she felt a small chill run through her. It wasn't fear exactly. More like the uneasy feeling of being seen after trying so long to stay invisible. She glanced toward the colonel as he sat down with a few officers, talking quietly. "Something wrong?" Jenkins asked, noticing her distant look. "No," Emma said quickly, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine." But everything didn't feel fine. She could feel the colonel's eyes on her once or twice more during breakfast. He didn't stare openly, but she noticed his glances. Thoughtful, searching, almost suspicious. After a while, the rush ended. Soldiers left for drills, the mess hall quieted, and Emma began cleaning up. But her hands moved a little slower now. That small, familiar tattoo, the one she thought no one would ever notice, had caught the attention of someone who clearly recognized it. And that changed everything. In her mind, old memories began to stir. The tattoo wasn't just a symbol. It was a reminder of a past life, one she had buried under years of silence and routine. She had promised herself no one would ever connect her to it again. But now, with one brief glance, that promise was slipping away. As she wiped down the counter, she took a deep breath and told herself it was nothing. Maybe he didn't really recognize it. Maybe he'd forget. But deep down, she already knew. People like Colonel Harlan didn't miss things like that. And if he had seen what she thought he'd seen, then the quiet life she had built in the mess hall was about to change forever. The morning passed slowly after the breakfast rush. The mess hall was finally quiet, and the sound of clattering trays had faded. Emma stayed behind the counter, wiping down tables and stacking dishes. Outside, soldiers shouted commands during their morning drills, but inside, only the hum of the refrigerator filled the air. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept going back to that moment, the colonel's look. It had been so quick, barely a second, but it carried something heavy. Not the kind of look people gave out of curiosity, but one of recognition. A look that said, "I know who you are." She had seen that kind of look before, years ago in another world, another uniform. And it always meant trouble. Emma rubbed her wrist absent-mindedly, where the tattoo was hidden beneath her sleeve. She had gotten it nearly 10 years ago, long before she ever thought she'd be serving food in a military mess hall. Back then, it was a badge of honor, a mark worn only by a few. But now it felt like a scar she couldn't erase. She pulled her sleeve down tighter and told herself to forget it. Maybe the colonel hadn't really seen it clearly. Maybe he'd brushed it off. He looked busy, after all. But a few hours later, her hope began to fade. When lunch preparation started, she noticed the colonel walking past the mess hall again. He wasn't with anyone this time. He didn't stop to eat. He just paused near the entrance and looked around, scanning the room. His eyes found her almost immediately. Emma's stomach tightened. She didn't move or speak, pretending to be focused on stirring the soup pot. After a few seconds, he nodded politely and left. That small gesture, so ordinary to anyone else, felt like confirmation. He hadn't forgotten. Later that afternoon, as she finished cleaning up, Corporal Jenkins came running in with a grin. "You won't believe this," he said. "Colonel Harlan just asked about you." Emma froze. "Asked about me?" she repeated slowly. "Yeah," Jenkins said, not noticing the worry on her face. "He asked how long you've been working here. Said you seemed disciplined, I think was his word. I told him you've been here about 6 months. Why? Did you know him before?" Emma forced a small smile. "No," she said softly. "Never met him." Her heart, however, was pounding hard. She knew exactly what was happening. He had seen the tattoo, and now he was trying to confirm who she really was. That evening, after the day's work ended, she went to her small room in the staff quarters. She sat on her bunk, staring at her wrist. The tattoo was still there, faded but unmistakable. A black dagger cutting through a winged skull at IT was the mark of Task Force Echo, a unit that didn't officially exist anymore. A secret team made up of soldiers chosen for missions that weren't talked about. Not even in official reports. Only a few people would ever recognize the mark. And Colonel Harlan, it seemed, was one of them. She thought about removing it once, years ago, but she couldn't. It wasn't just ink. It was a reminder of people she'd lost. friends who never came back from missions that no one would ever speak about. The tattoo was all she had left of them. Now, that same mark had given her away. That night, she didn't sleep much. Every sound outside, footsteps, voices, doors closing, made her tense. Old instincts returned, ones she thought she'd buried long ago. The careful listening, the awareness of movement, the habit of keeping her bag packed in case she needed to leave fast. By morning, she had convinced herself she was overreacting. Maybe the colonel was just curious, nothing more. She dressed as usual, tied her apron, and walked to the mess hall. But when she arrived, the base felt different. Soldiers stood straighter, the air heavier. The colonel was there again, this time speaking quietly to a few officers near the entrance. When his eyes met hers, there was no question anymore. He knew. After breakfast, when most of the soldiers had left, he approached her counter. She looked up, her heart steady but her mind racing. "Private Walsh," he said calmly. "You've been doing good work here. May I have a moment of your time?" His tone was polite, but his eyes were searching. Emma nodded slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Of course, sir." He gestured toward a quieter corner of the mess hall. For a moment they stood in silence. Then he spoke again. "That tattoo," he said quietly. "I've seen it before." Emma's chest tightened. "It's just an old design," she said softly, avoiding his gaze. The colonel didn't argue. He only nodded. "Maybe so," he replied. "But that design doesn't show up by accident." His voice lowered even more. "You served with Task Force Echo, didn't you?" Emma looked down, her throat dry. She could lie, but she knew it wouldn't matter. He already knew. "Finally," she said quietly, "I don't talk about that anymore, sir." For a long moment, the colonel didn't speak. His expression softened, showing something between respect and sadness. "Understood," he said finally. "But you should know. People like us don't just disappear. Whether you wear that uniform or serve food, your service never stops meaning something." Emma didn't respond. She simply nodded. As he walked away, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. A mix of fear, pride, and pain. The past she had tried to bury had found her again. And this time, she wasn't sure if she could keep it hidden. The next day, Colonel Harlan sat in his small office, staring at the open file on his desk. The name on the top read, Private Emma Walsh. It looked like any ordinary personnel file, thin, with only a few pages inside. But that was exactly what bothered him. For someone as disciplined and composed as the woman he'd met in the mess hall, her record seemed strangely incomplete. The file said she had been transferred from a classified division 6 months ago. No previous unit number. No medals. No combat record. Nothing. Just a brief note at the bottom. Reassigned to non-combat duties at own request. That kind of note didn't appear often. And when it did, it usually meant something had happened, something serious. The colonel leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. He had seen that tattoo years ago, during a mission briefing in Eastern Europe. It belonged to Task Force Echo, a small special forces team that worked off the books. They were elite, invisible, and ruthless when needed. And then, one day, they disappeared. Officially disbanded after a failed operation that no one was supposed to talk about. The colonel remembered hearing rumors that most of the unit was lost, that only a few came back. The survivors were scattered, given new identities or quiet assignments. And now, standing quietly behind a food counter at Fort Bragg, one of them was serving scrambled eggs. It didn't make sense. Why would a soldier with that kind of background choose to work in a mess hall? What had driven her to leave behind everything she once was? Colonel Harlan wasn't the type to chase rumors. He had spent years in the military, long enough to know that every soldier carried their own ghosts. But something about Emma's silence troubled him. It wasn't just mystery, it was pain. He picked up the phone. "Get me a copy of all records on Private Emma Walsh," he said to his aide, "including transfer reports." An hour later, he received the same thin file with nothing more inside. No record of her prior assignments, no training logs, no rank history. It was as if she had appeared out of nowhere. He sighed, closing the folder. Whoever she really was, Someone high up had made sure her past stayed hidden. Meanwhile, in the mess hall, Emma felt the tension growing. The colonel hadn't spoken to her since their quiet conversation, but she could sense that he was digging. She could feel it in the way a few officers started looking at her differently, with a hint of curiosity. She tried to act normal, keeping her focus on the work. Cleaning tables, preparing meals, smiling politely. But inside, she was on edge. Her hands shook slightly when she poured coffee, and sometimes she caught herself glancing toward the door, expecting him to appear. That afternoon, as she carried a tray of supplies to the storeroom, she noticed a figure standing near the kitchen entrance. It was Colonel Harlan. He wasn't saying anything, just watching quietly. She stopped for a moment. "Something I can help you with, sir?" she asked, her voice calm but guarded. He gave a polite smile. "No, Private. Just observing. You run this place like clockwork." "Just doing my job, sir," she replied. He nodded. "That's what they all say." Then, after a pause, he added softly, "You know, I looked into Task Force Echo after we spoke." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't reply. She just stared at him, holding the tray a little tighter. "They were good people," he continued. "Brave. Most of them didn't make it back. You did." Emma's throat tightened. "That's not something I like to talk about, sir." "I understand," the colonel said gently. "But you should know I respect what you've done, whatever it was. The records may be gone, but the service isn't." She looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "With respect, sir," she said quietly. "I just want to serve quietly now. That's all." He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "All right, Private. I'll leave it at that." But even as he walked away, he knew he wouldn't. Something inside him couldn't let it go. He had seen soldiers like her before, ones carrying invisible wounds, running from the past instead of facing it. And he couldn't help but wonder what had happened on that mission that made her hide herself so completely. That night, after everyone had gone, he opened his computer and searched through restricted archives. Most of the files on Task Force Echo were sealed, but one report remained accessible, a casualty summary. There it was, Operation Iron Falcon, Eastern Europe, 2016. Out of 12 members, 7 confirmed dead, 3 missing, 2 survivors. And one of those survivors was listed as Sergeant Emma Walsh. He sat back in silence. Sergeant, not private. She had once been a high-ranking, decorated soldier. Yet now, she wore a lower rank and served food in silence. That wasn't a simple reassignment. That was someone trying to disappear. The colonel felt a pang of guilt. He wasn't trying to expose her, but he couldn't stop wondering. What could break a soldier like her so deeply that she'd give up everything? Meanwhile, Emma lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. She could feel the past pressing against her chest again. She remembered the mission, the explosion, the radio silence, the faces of her team before everything went dark. She had survived, but a part of her had never come back. She had promised herself she'd never speak of it again. But now, the colonel's questions were slowly pulling those memories back to the surface. She turned to the wall, closing her eyes, whispering to herself, "Don't look back. Don't let him in." But deep down, she already knew. The colonel wouldn't stop until he knew the truth. And for the first time in years, Emma felt fear. Not of war, not of death, but of being seen again. The next morning, Emma woke before sunrise. She sat quietly on her bunk for a long time, staring at the floor, trying to steady her thoughts. The base outside was silent except for the distant hum of generators and the early footsteps of guards changing shifts. She hadn't slept much. All night, she kept thinking about Colonel Harlan. His questions, his searching eyes, his tone that was too calm to ignore. She knew he had looked into her past. She could feel it. She had spent months building a quiet, invisible life here. No one asked questions. No one looked twice. But now, because of one tattoo and one sharp-eyed colonel, everything she had carefully hidden was starting to crack open. When the kitchen lights came on, Emma put on her apron and got to work as usual. She chopped vegetables, turned on the stove, and filled the coffee pots. Her movements were quick but tense. Even Jenkins, who usually joked every morning, noticed something was off. "You okay, Walsh?" he asked, pouring pancake batter. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Emma forced a small smile. "Just tired," she said softly. "Couldn't sleep." But her heart raced every time the door opened, half expecting to see the colonel walk in. Breakfast came and went like every other day. Soldiers came, laughed, grabbed their trays and left for drills. Emma moved through the lines silently, her thoughts far away. Then, just as she began cleaning up, she saw him. Colonel Harlan stood at the door again, his hands behind his back, watching quietly. Their eyes met and he gave a small nod. Not a command, not even an order, just a signal that said, "We need to talk." Emma knew this moment would come. She took a slow breath and turned to Jenkins. "Can you finish the cleanup? I'll be back in a bit." Jenkins nodded. "Sure thing." She removed her apron and walked toward the colonel. Her steps were steady, but inside she felt every heartbeat echo in her chest. "Morning, sir," she said when she reached him. "Morning, Private," he replied. "Do you have a moment?" She nodded. "Yes, sir." He led her out of the mess hall to a quiet path behind the building. It was a calm area, lined with trees where the sound of drills was faint. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the branches. Finally, the colonel turned to her. "I owe you honesty," he said. "After our last talk, I did some checking." Emma looked down, her jaw tightening. "I figured you might. I wasn't trying to invade your privacy," he continued, his tone calm and steady. "But when I saw that tattoo, I knew I'd seen it before. Task Force Echo. That's not something you forget." Emma didn't answer. She just crossed her arms, staring at the ground. "I found your old record," he went on quietly. "You were a sergeant, highly decorated. You were listed as one of only 2 survivors from Operation Iron Falcon." Her breath caught for a moment, but she stayed silent. "I don't know what happened out there," Harlan said, "but it must have been something serious for you to walk away from everything." Emma's eyes lifted to his. "Serious doesn't even begin to cover it," she said softly. For a long moment, the two just looked at each other, soldier to soldier. Then she spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. "You want to know why I'm here, sir? Why I'm serving food instead of wearing rank?" He didn't respond, just nodded slowly. "I lost my team," she said. "Every single one of them. We went in on a mission we weren't ready for. The intel was wrong, the extraction was late, and we got trapped. I watched people I trained with, people I called family, get torn apart in front of me. And when I came back, all they told me was to forget, to move on." Her voice shook slightly, but she didn't stop. "They told me I'd done my duty. But I didn't feel like a hero, Colonel. I felt like a ghost." The colonel stayed silent. His eyes softened. "So I left," Emma continued. "I asked for a reassignment. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one would ask about medals or missions or who I used to be. The mess hall gave me that peace. I could serve without remembering. For a while, there was only the sound of wind and distant shouting from the training fields. Finally, the colonel said, "You survived something no one should have had to. But you didn't fail them, Walsh. You lived. And that matters." She gave a small, bitter smile. "You sound like my old commanding officer. He used to say the same thing, right before he died." The colonel's jaw tightened. He wanted to say more, but he could see she wasn't ready. "I'm not trying to drag you back into the past," he said carefully. "But you shouldn't hide from who you are. The soldiers here, they could learn something from someone like you." Emma shook her head. "I'm not a soldier anymore, sir. I'm just a cook." "Maybe," he said quietly. "But cooks don't stand like that. They don't move like that. And they don't catch falling pans without looking." He smiled faintly. "You can tell yourself you've left it behind, but it's still in you." For a long moment, Emma didn't respond. She looked away toward the horizon, where the morning sun was breaking through the clouds. Finally, she said, "You think I can teach people how to survive? I couldn't even save my own team." The colonel took a step closer. "You did what you could. Sometimes surviving is the hardest thing to do. You can't change the past, but you can honor it. Her eyes glistened slightly, though she blinked the tears away before they could fall. Just think about it, he said gently, before walking back toward the main building. Emma stood there for a long time after he left. The wind tugged at her sleeves, and for the first time in years, she didn't pull them down. She looked at the tattoo on her wrist, the black dagger, the wings, the skull, and for the first time she didn't feel shame. She still didn't know what she was ready to do, but she knew one thing. The Colonel was right. No matter how far she tried to run from her past, it would always be part of her. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding. That night, Emma sat on her bunk, staring at her wrist under the small light of her bedside lamp. The tattoo looked darker in the dim glow, the black dagger cutting through the skull with wings spreading wide. She traced it slowly with her finger, feeling the raised ink beneath her skin. It wasn't just a tattoo. It was a story, one she had tried to bury for years. But now, after talking to Colonel Harlan, the memories she had locked away were finally coming back, one by one. She remembered the day she got it. It was years ago, long before she ever worked in a kitchen. She had been 25 then, full of fire and pride, wearing the rank of Sergeant Emma Walsh, part of a unit that few even knew existed, Task Force Echo. Back then, she believed in everything, the mission, the team, the cause. Her unit was small, just 12 members, but they were more like family than soldiers. They trained together, ate together, joked together. Each one had a skill that made them special. One was a medic who could fix anything with a bandage and grit. Another was a sharpshooter with perfect aim. Another, her closest friend, Lieutenant Adam Reese, was their team leader, strong, calm, and always putting his people first. They had been through many missions, but nothing like the one that changed everything, Operation Iron Falcon. The orders were simple on paper. Infiltrate an abandoned factory in Eastern Europe, retrieve stolen intelligence, and get out fast. But things never go as planned. The intel was wrong. The enemy wasn't gone, they were waiting. Emma could still remember the sound of gunfire echoing through the narrow hallways, the flash of grenades, the chaos, the shouting. She remembered Reese yelling over the comms, "Fall back! Get to extraction point Bravo." But Bravo never came. Their communication lines went dead, and the backup team never arrived. They were trapped. For 3 days, Emma and what was left of her unit fought to stay alive inside that ruined factory. Every corner felt like an ambush. Every sound made them jump. By the second night, half the team was gone. She still remembered their faces, every one of them. When the final attack came, Emma had been hit by shrapnel but kept fighting. She dragged Reese, who was bleeding badly, behind a broken wall. He looked at her with weak eyes and said, "You're getting out, Walsh. You're the toughest one here." She had shaken her head, refusing to leave. "I'm not leaving you, sir." He smiled faintly. "That's an order." Those were the last words he ever said. When she was finally rescued, days later, she was the only one found alive. The official report called it a successful extraction under fire. But Emma knew better. It wasn't success. It was survival, and it came with a price. When she returned home, they tried to honor her. Medals, ceremonies, words like bravery and sacrifice. None of it made sense to her anymore. She couldn't sleep without seeing their faces. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard their voices calling out in the dark. She couldn't take it. So she asked for reassignment, something quiet, something simple, something far away from combat. That's how she ended up in the mess hall. The tattoo on her wrist was the only thing she kept. It was their symbol, the mark of Task Force Echo, designed by Reese himself. He used to say, "The dagger means courage. The wings mean freedom. And the skull? That's the price we pay." After the war, she thought about covering it up, maybe removing it. But she couldn't. It wasn't just ink. It was the last piece of them she had left. Now, years later, standing behind a food counter, that same mark had brought her past crashing back. As she sat alone in her bunk that night, tears welled in her eyes. Not the loud kind, just the quiet, heavy ones that come when memories hurt too much to speak. She hadn't cried in years. Not when she left, not when she was reassigned, not when people treated her like just another kitchen worker. But now, the weight of it all felt too much to carry. She remembered the colonel's words from earlier. You can't change the past, but you can honor it. Honor it. The words echoed in her mind. Maybe he was right. Maybe hiding from her past wasn't the same as healing. Maybe she had been punishing herself for surviving, when she could have been keeping her team's legacy alive. The next morning, when she looked at herself in the mirror, something felt different. Her face still looked tired, her eyes still carried that quiet sadness, but there was a new kind of strength there, the kind she hadn't seen in a long time. At breakfast, the other cooks noticed she seemed quieter than usual, but also calmer. Even Jenkins whispered to another cook, "Something's different about her today." Emma didn't say much, but inside, she had made a small promise to herself. She wouldn't let their memory fade away in silence anymore. Later that day, she walked out behind the mess hall during her break and stood under the morning sun. She pulled her sleeve up and looked at the tattoo again. For the first time in years, she didn't hide it. She whispered softly, "You're still with me." In that moment, it felt like her team was there again. Not in pain or in battle, but in spirit. And for the first time, Emma felt a small spark of peace. She didn't know what would happen next or what the colonel had planned, but she knew one thing. She was done running. And that was the first step toward forgiving herself. A few days passed quietly after Emma's talk with the colonel. Life at the base went on like usual. Soldiers came and went, meals were served, trays clattered, and laughter filled the mess hall. On the surface, everything looked the same. But inside Emma, something had changed. She no longer tried to hide her tattoo. She stopped wearing the long sleeves that used to cover it. Some soldiers noticed and asked about it, but she would only smile faintly and say, "Old memories." Still, there was a different kind of respect in their eyes now, even if they didn't know the full story. Colonel Harlan hadn't spoken to her again since their conversation. He'd been busy with training drills and meetings, and Emma tried not to think too much about him. But deep down, she knew it wasn't over. He wasn't the kind of man to let something go unfinished. One evening, when the mess hall was closing, Jenkins came rushing in, a bit out of breath. "Emma, the colonel wants to see you in his office," he said, wiping his hands. Emma froze for a second. "Now?" "Yeah," he said, "it's important." Her heart gave a nervous thump. She nodded slowly, untied her apron, and wiped her hands on a towel. "Thanks, Jenkins," she said quietly. She took a deep breath before stepping out into the cool evening air. The sky was painted orange and purple, and the sound of marching boots echoed from a nearby training field. She walked down the gravel path toward the administrative building, trying to calm the uneasy feeling in her chest. When she reached the colonel's office, the door was slightly open. She knocked softly. "Come in," came the deep, steady voice from inside. Emma stepped in and stood at attention. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Colonel Harlan looked up from his desk. His uniform was crisp as always, his eyes focused but not unkind. "At ease, Walsh. Sit down." She sat across from him, her hands resting on her knees. He leaned back slightly, studying her. "You've been quiet since we last talked," he said. "I've been thinking," she admitted. He nodded. "Good. Thinking is where change starts." He paused for a moment, then reached into a folder on his desk and pulled out a few papers. "I made a few calls," he continued. "Talked to some people who still remember you. Your record is still clean, you know. You were one of the best." Emma gave a small, uncomfortable smile. "That was a long time ago, sir." "Maybe," he said, "but talent like yours doesn't fade. It just goes quiet until it's needed again." She looked at him curiously. "What are you saying?" He placed the papers on the table and pushed them toward her. "I'm starting a new training program for recruits," he said. "It's for those struggling to adapt, soldiers with potential but no direction. I want you to help me run it." Emma blinked, not sure she heard him right. "Me?" "Yes, you." She shook her head immediately. "Sir, I'm not a teacher. I'm not even." "You're a survivor," he interrupted. "And that makes you exactly what they need. These kids don't need textbook heroes. They need someone who knows what it's like out there. Someone who's faced fear, loss, and still kept moving." She stared at the papers on his desk. They had her name printed at the top: special assignment proposal. Sergeant, Rhett. Emma Walsh. Her throat tightened. I appreciate it, sir. But I left that life behind. I can't go back. I'm not asking you to go back, the colonel said calmly. I'm asking you to move forward. In a different way. Emma stood up and walked to the window. Outside, she could see young soldiers jogging, laughing, pushing each other. Full of energy and dreams, like she once was. For a moment, she imagined what it would be like to train them, to pass on what she'd learned the hard way. But then the images of her old team came back. The screams, the fire, the loss. I don't think I can, she whispered. I'm not that person anymore. Colonel Harlan rose from his chair and walked beside her. Maybe not, but maybe you're someone even stronger now. She turned to look at him. Why me, sir? You could have anyone. Someone who didn't break. He gave a small smile. Because you did break, Walsh. And you got back up. That's the kind of strength no training manual can teach. His words hit her deep inside. She didn't know how to respond. After a long silence, he said gently, You don't have to decide right now. Take a few days. Think about it. If you say no, I'll respect that. But if you say yes, you could make a real difference again. He handed her the papers. She took them slowly, staring at her own name as if it belonged to someone else. That night, back in her quarters, she sat on her bunk reading through the proposal. Every line made her heart beat a little faster. It wasn't just a job. It was a chance. A chance to heal, to honor her team, to find meaning again. She thought about Lieutenant Reese, about his smile and the way he used to tell her, You're stronger than you think, Walsh. Maybe he'd been right. The next morning, Emma walked out early, before dawn. The air was cool and the base was quiet. She stood on the training field, watching the sun slowly rise. For the first time in years, she imagined herself not as a ghost of her past, but as someone who could still do something good. When the first soldiers appeared for morning drills, she smiled faintly. Maybe, she thought, it was time to stop hiding behind the mess hall walls. She looked down at her tattoo, the dagger, the wings, the skull, and whispered, Let's do this. And with that, Emma Walsh began to believe that maybe the end of her story hadn't come after all. It was just beginning again. In a new way. A week later, the morning sun shone brightly over the base, lighting up the training grounds. The air was cool and filled with the distant sound of footsteps, commands, and laughter. The recruits were lined up for their drills. Some nervous, some excited, some still half asleep. Among them stood a familiar figure, one no one expected to see in uniform again. Emma Walsh. She wasn't wearing her old combat gear, just a simple training uniform, sleeves rolled up, her tattoo visible for everyone to see. Her hair was tied back neatly, and though her face looked calm, her heart was beating fast. It felt strange being here again, standing in front of soldiers, not as a cook or a ghost from the past, but as someone ready to lead again. Colonel Harlan stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching her quietly. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod. It was a silent message, You're ready. Emma turned to the line of recruits, most of them much younger than she was. They looked at her curiously, unsure of who this quiet woman was. Some of them whispered to each other, wondering why the colonel had brought a cook to their training ground. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. All right, she said, her voice firm but steady. My name is Emma Walsh. Some of you may have seen me in the mess hall. Yes, I used to cook your meals. But before that, I was a soldier just like you. The recruits went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. I was part of a special unit called Task Force Echo, she continued. We did missions no one ever talked about. Some of us came home. Some didn't. I was one of the lucky ones. Her words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavy. I'm not here to give you orders, she said. I'm here to teach you something more important than drills and targets. I'm here to teach you what it means to survive. Not just in battle, but in here. She tapped her chest lightly. In your heart. The young soldiers watched her closely now, their earlier whispers gone. There was something in her tone, something real. Over the next few weeks, Emma worked side by side with the recruits. She showed them how to read the ground, how to move quietly, how to trust their instincts. But more than that, she taught them how to stay calm under pressure, how to look out for each other, how to lead when things went wrong. She didn't shout or bark orders like some instructors did. Her way was quiet but firm, built on respect rather than fear. The soldiers soon began to admire her, not because of her title, but because of her strength. One afternoon, during a field exercise, a young recruit named Carter froze during a simulated ambush. The sound of fake gunfire startled him, and he dropped to the ground, panicking. Emma rushed to him, crouching beside him. "Breathe," she said softly. "You're okay. Focus on my voice. You're not alone." He looked at her, shaking. I can't move." "Yes, you can," she said calmly. "You're stronger than you think. Listen to me, one breath in, one breath out. Now move to that rock. You see it?" He nodded slowly and followed her instructions. When he finally reached cover, his breathing steadied. After the exercise, he came up to her and said quietly, "Thank you, ma'am. I thought I failed." Emma smiled gently. "Failure isn't falling down, Carter. The staying down. You got back up. That's what matters." Moments like that reminded her why she'd come back. Every time a recruit learned something new, every time they pushed through fear, it felt like a small piece of her old pain was healing. One evening, after a long day of training, Emma stood by the field alone. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Colonel Harlan walked up beside her. "They respect you," he said. Emma smiled faintly. "They're good kids. Better than they know." "You've done something incredible here," he said quietly. "You've given them more than skills. You've given them heart." She looked at the horizon. "Maybe that's what my team wanted me to do all along," she said softly. Harlan nodded. They'd be proud. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the sound of the wind passing between them. Later that night, back in her quarters, Emma sat by her bed and looked at an old photo she had kept hidden for years, her task force echo team. The faces smiling back at her were young, full of life. She touched the photo gently and whispered, "We made it, guys. In a way, we made it." Then she tucked the photo safely back into her drawer. But this time, it wasn't out of guilt or sadness. It was with peace. The next morning, when the sun rose again over the base, Emma was already on the training field. She greeted each soldier with a nod, correcting their stances, encouraging them to push harder. There was laughter, a few groans of exhaustion, and the kind of energy that made her heart feel alive again. As she watched the recruits running drills, she realized something she hadn't felt in years. She belonged. Not as a ghost from the past, not as a cook hiding behind a counter, but as Emma Walsh, a survivor, a soldier, and now a teacher. And in that moment, under the bright morning sun, she finally understood what her old commander meant when he said the skull in their tattoo was the price they pay. It wasn't about death or fear. It was about remembering that every day she lived, every person she helped, was a way to honor those who couldn't come back. Emma smiled to herself. The past would always be part of her, but now it didn't weigh her down. It lifted her up. She picked up a whistle, blew it loudly, and called out to the recruits. "All right, everyone, one more round. Let's see what you've got." Their voices rose in unison as they ran across the field. And for the first time in a long, long time, Emma felt truly alive. Not haunted by yesterday, but standing proudly in today. It was a new beginning,